So today is going to be a really interesting chat. A lot of the time we look to thought leaders and we look to sustainability professionals in our space to look at what they've practically done, what they've implemented in their workplaces, and how procurement and non-financial aspects like sustainability can start to merge for better outcomes. So today I am very excited to be chatting with Chris Lowe. Chris is the procurement sustainability guru at Haleon, and he's going to probably take us through a bit of his journey, a lot of questions that we all have around what's changing inside organizations at the moment, and some just real practical takeaways that will help inside your organization. So, Chris, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Great to see you. Thanks for inviting me.
Not a problem at all. So, really interested in your background. You've had 7 years in sustainability in in procurement, in services and IT. You didn't have a sustainability title at that time. And now you've come in and you are in this sort of sustainability and procurement role. So could you just give us a bit of a background around how you got there and what you think has helped having this procurement background? How has that helped you achieve what you've done so far today?
Yeah, for sure. So you're absolutely right. So most of my career has been in sort of classic procurement, rising up through the ranks to become a category director for a whole range of different commodities. But I think, because of what we'll be talking about, that procurement is really in the middle of decarbonization and sustainability, that those category director roles have got me increasingly more engaged into sustainability over the years. And so, because I was also very passionate about it and I got, put myself into those roles, but also my last one, as you mentioned, was in packaging procurement. So I was leading packaging procurement for Haleon. And as you can imagine, looking at the next generation of packaging, it's all about sustainability. And so we're as a company, we're trying to make all of our packaging recyclable. We're trying to make with much less virgin petroleum-based plastic. And so, there's all sorts of changes that are taking place. So I was very involved in sustainability. And then what actually happened within Haleon was that there was a decentralization of procurement into the region. So the global packaging procurement got decentralized and they wanted, it was also at a time soon after we spun off as a company from GSK, where we were thrust into a group of peers with Unilever, P&G, Reckitt's, all of these companies that have got a long tenure of expertise in sustainability. And so we needed to really accelerate our journey. And so it was at that time that the chief procurement officer decided to augment the procurement sustainability team and put a director into that lead role. And so and it was also combined with a bit of packaging innovation. So it was a perfect role for me. And I was fortunate enough to land that role and haven't looked back since. Obviously, really driving all of the environmental stuff, not only decarbonization, but all the sustainable sourcing, as well as the human rights changes across the business.
Amazing. There's a bit of a, I don't know if argument is the right word, but it's going around on LinkedIn a bit at the moment. Do you just embed sustainability in these departments, or should you have a leader of sustainability so that accountability is there? Is everyone in procurement in sustainability? What's your view on that? Do you think they made the right decision in terms of that structure and approach?
I think so. I don't think just, okay, we're building it into everything, there you go, works.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, So the way that it's been structured is, I am and my team, we are sitting in the midst of the category teams and the regional
Mm-hmm.
procurement teams, and we are working with them and helping them and supporting them and driving the education of them and our suppliers every day. So just
Mm.
building it into the structures, whilst actually, that's kind of on my list of a lot of the things that you do need to be doing, but that by itself is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the support structure is a crucial part of the journey.
Do you think you've been so influential, and we'll come to this because obviously you've achieved a lot, actually, just projects done. They've had an impact. You're not still whiteboarding, and in many cases, do you think that coming from procurement, just pure procurement, category leader, and then coming into the heart of a procurement team. Is it your ability to speak that language and perhaps have empathy for the nitty gritty and the 10,000 other considerations that they have beyond sustainability? Is that the reason why you've been so successful here, or is there another sort of criteria?
I think it helps. But I don't think, a sort of 15-year tenure in procurement is necessary. I think that the learnings of, how to do this and are there for everybody to take. Whilst, I think it's definitely aided, I think putting the right structures in place, understanding how business works, understanding when you've got the best leverage with your suppliers,
Mm,
and all of the touch points of how procurement does business and how you can integrate sustainability into all of those is probably
mm.
the crux.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Most organizations know that they should embed sustainability into the procurement process or how they do business. But unfortunately, in the moment, very few still do. Other than, I guess, the big picture where maybe they don't have resources. So outside of that, why do you think that is happening? Is it priority? Is it not understanding the value? Is it the ESG narrative that is going on? When you look around and know what you've done and you say, why can't everyone move this way? What would you say is the top thing that's stopping this progress?
It is a tough one, and I often look around, and even very mature companies with commitments are not doing much. Um, I've met people at conferences that say, "Oh, we're really struggling with our primary data. We've got only 80% of our PCFs." I'm like, "What? 80%? I'm at like 24%, and we've already been doing stuff, for 5 years or more. Don't wait for perfect." So there's every number of things. Obviously there's many organizations that don't have the executive support, and that
Hmm.
really is fundamental, even when they have corporate targets. So that's an
Hmm.
interesting dynamic where the company have committed to something, but actually you don't have the management support. That's a very tricky one. But I think what if we look at some of the kind of recipes of success of what we've seen of companies that have done this well, and I have to say, there is a degree of just get on and do it, and ask for forgiveness later if needed. But especially if there is a corporate goal, there are lots of things that we can be getting on with that don't require funding, that just we can support our suppliers in building resilience, in saving money, and driving decarbonization and sustainability at the same time. So there's plenty of sweet spots like that. Renewable electricity is a great example where if they invest in power purchase agreements, VPPAs, and so on, in many jurisdictions of the world, India, Europe, and North America, you can save money while doing these things. And
Yeah.
so why would you not just get on and do it? So that's
Mm.
very much my mantra. Obviously we do, whenever there's important decisions that could cost the business money, we obviously get the executive support that we need. But there's lots of things that are just get on and do it.
Just facilitate it. I will come to that. But on that question of the executive support, what do you do if you're sitting in an organization where perhaps they have an SBTI Scope 3 target, or they've committed to something else that requires this investment, or at the very least this engagement, but practically nothing is moving? What's your tips on how to influence that situation? What would you do if you were experiencing that?
Well, and I think it's very pertinent at the moment with the geopolitical situation, right? There is a lack of momentum in some organizations, despite perhaps being signed up to SBTI, as you say. And so, I think it's down to looking at, why people don't want to do it, and thinking about the agenda, and what are their priorities. So,
Hmm.
I think there's a common misconception that sustainability costs money, and you can there are still so many things where you can save money and drive decarbonization and sustainability at the same time. You know, just think about those messages. So, instead of talking about, I had a very interesting example the other day. Instead of talking about, pure sustainability, go in and say, okay, what should our energy strategy be? And we can
Yeah.
build resilience, we can
Hmm.
build cost reduction, and we can remove ourselves from the sort of fluctuations and volatility of the fossil fuel prices, which is obviously particularly pertinent as we record this. Um, so those are the things that virtually
Mm.
all business leaders can relate to and they want to drive. And so, take away sustainability as the lead, but actually think about the other things that it's driving, and relate to their agenda and what they want to do in order to
Mm.
persuade them.
Mm. It's like bring that strategy. And I know when I was in procurement in industry, I used to be responsible for the electricity contract and strategy for the year, gas, obviously all utilities in that process. And you would have events, obviously nothing like we're experiencing right now, but it might be drought where you were had a market relying on hydropower, or obviously at the moment you only have to scroll through at night and see every second politician is now sitting in an electric truck, talking about all of the benefits of that, which is fantastic, obviously. But it's about, I guess, leveraging these real risks to the business's bottom line. And that doesn't need to be an ESG conversation. You can think about that as though you're a business analyst and talk to whoever it is responsible for this and just use that opportunity, right?
You're right, exactly right. Um,
That's If you're a sustainability leader who does see the opportunity to embed sustainability into the procurement process, so maybe if it's a tender evaluation, we should be considering this environmental impact. Maybe when we are managing our supplier contracts, we should have requirements around what they support on. Provide on sustainability, and any other way that you can embed this process. But the procurement team, or maybe the leader of procurement, says, we are underwater, Chris. There is more stuff coming at us than ever. There's more services, more tools, more vendors. AI is just basically pumping the decisions through the pipeline, and I'm still trying to pick up the paper forms and process them. If you're getting that feedback from people, and I know a lot of organizations are, where this remains a very nice to do, how do you move beyond that?
it somewhat comes back to what we've just talked about. The fundamental assumption in that resistance is that it's going to cost money. And
Or be
so,
time?
yeah, okay, but time to constrain, but because I need to be spending my time on things that are going to save money. And so actually if you flip that on its head and you say, okay, well, let's look at targeting specifically the areas where we know that we can save money. So we can actually drive exactly what you're trying to do as the procurement function, so that we don't just try and do everything everywhere. We focus our attentions on the specific areas where you can get, good return on investments from heat pumps. Like, so India or China, US, they're all pretty good markets. Around Europe, you've got to be careful. Some of them, the price to gas ratios are not, of electricity to gas, sorry, are not favorable. So,
Hmm.
you've got to say where is a good market. If you're thinking about renewable electricity and you're thinking about joining cohorts or going into VPPA, Europe is still a very good market. We've just been to the market for a large virtual power purchase agreement in Spain, and the economics are looking pretty favorable. In fact, the AI boom is creating a tension in the electricity market that is, people were fearing that in Spain, with all these investments into solar and so on, that the market would go down. But actually, the long-term forecasts are now looking much more level over the next few years, that these things are balancing out. Same in America. We're seeing massive investments into AI data centers. That's meaning that those renewable electricity investments will pay back. So, you know, the other story, and if we have time, we've been taking some of these things into our own hands rather than getting every single supplier, especially as you get into tier N suppliers. It's very difficult to be influencing those, and so we've been thinking about market instruments and how can you do a fewer big things that again will
Yes.
save money and drive decarbonization at the same time. So, I
Mm,
think that's what I would really recommend is either targeting very specific suppliers where you see an opportunity,
mhm.
or taking those market instruments where you can do big things with proportionally less effort.
And what is biggest bang for buck if you think about maybe an organization that might be a little less mature in this journey, or perhaps some of the biggest projects or initiatives that you and your team have executed on? If you're waking up today and the executive says, go for your life, Chris, do whatever you want, what would you say are the initiatives to really progress first if you are looking to embed sustainability in procurement?
So whilst there are some of those, big ticket items that I just referred to, I think
Hmm.
when you're starting off, if you've got carte blanche to do what you want to do, you need to set out the stall as far as these are the areas we want to be focusing on, and these are the incentives I would suggest. So,
Hmm.
um, you know, I don't know if it was the reason why you invited me, but I've been very much involved in setting up carbon pricing.
Yes.
We came up with an idea just over 2 years ago, and we thought that, again, like I said at the beginning, to say that we need to really accelerate and catch up with a lot of our peers, we need to create that positive environment where our suppliers feel incentivized and supported in
Hmm.
taking this journey. And so we put in this carbon pricing program, which really says when you go to tender, not only do you ask the traditional price, but you also ask what's the carbon footprint of the generally materials, but could be services that they are providing. And we multiply that carbon footprint by the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme cost of carbon. So that's just over 70 euros per ton of carbon at the moment.
Hmm.
Um, and that then we it's only a theoretical number, but that creates or calculates a total cost of ownership, and we make the decision, the price portion of the decision, around that total cost. So, and by publishing that, by telling our suppliers early about that, we've
Hmm.
I think our suppliers can now rely that that is how we do business. If they are going to be making investments, if they're going to be making changes to their business, whether that be energy efficiency, heat pumps, renewable electricity, whatever it might be, they know that as long as that's cost them less than 70 X euros of per ton of carbon that they're saving, that will be making them more competitive when they come to
Yes.
tender with us. And so, that's the long-term layout that I think that companies really should be setting out. Um, I think that then just guiding and educating and supporting your suppliers. And so, again, this can cost money and resources, but there are lots of great education courses out there now that have been created that we can share. So it's educating the internal procurement groups and the suppliers as to the fundamentals of what we need to be doing together as a journey. And what we did is we put out a 5 point climate pledge, which really
Hmm.
asked for them as the foundation of the program to be thinking about these five key things. The first one was
Hmm.
around creating carbon footprints for everything. The second was around signing up to the Science Based Targets Initiative. Number
Hmm.
three, around moving to renewable electricity. And we were quite bold about the timeline of that. Many companies are saying by 2030. We said, no, this is the first, the easiest, and the cheapest thing that we need to be doing because we'd committed to 42% decarbonization by 2030. We can't be waiting to only just be doing renewable electricity with our tier one suppliers by then. So,
For sure.
we said by the end of 2025, we need to be
Hmm.
at 100% renewable electricity. And then number four and
Hmm.
five of the pledge were around making roadmaps to net zero so that we can see the big ticket items of where their emissions are coming from and how they're going to drive towards the net zero goal. And finally, around cascading, that they need to put in a program of cascading decarbonization to their suppliers because much like us, our 70% of our carbon footprint comes from our suppliers. If our suppliers are anything the same, then you can't just do this by addressing um, the tier one.
Amazing. That's really fascinating because a lot of companies I talk to see setting a carbon price as one of the most ambitious things that they can do. The thought of choosing a number, communicating with suppliers, having procurement actually consider that just feels light years away. How would you respond to that? Was it really that big a deal? How did you get it approved? And have you gone out to suppliers beyond those who are probably, big enough that they're already doing this themselves or have 10 other customers asking for the same thing? And how did those suppliers respond?
Yeah. So we so I sort of came up with the idea, and my chief procurement officer and I, we had some different thoughts and ideas about, and so there was a little bit of then kind of noodling over exactly how it would work and how we could make it as simple and sort of powerful as possible.
Hmm.
And so the initial discussions then became between me and my CPO and the head of supply chain sustainability, and we were convinced that this was a good idea, and we basically made it happen. But we then did take it all the way up the chain, and it went to the board, and was approved by the Haleon board. Um, Now that sounds like an awful lot of formality and so on, but actually, you know, I think that people are very worried about this. They see that, okay, you're going to be putting this price tag onto carbon and it's going to cost us millions of pounds. But actually, that's not the case. When we looked at our situation, and even if so there are kind of four steps. I don't know if you want me to talk you through, but they're
Please.
detailed in this SPP um,
Mm,
methodology, if you want to see this. But the first step is to say, okay, so how much is my total carbon footprint multiplied by the EU ETS price? And so you
mhm,
come up with the worst case scenario number.
mhm,
Now, for us, I think that was something like 2% inflation.
mhm,
That would be assuming that you got to net zero overnight at
mhm,
70 euros per ton. So that's never going to happen, right? So um, the second step is you say, well, how much do those decarbonization levers actually cost? And so if you think about renewable electricity as a great example, in most of the world, that's coming in at about 5 to 10 euros per ton of carbon saved. And so it's not 70, the fair market price of that is 5, 10, worst case scenario 20. So once you start to factor that in, let's simplify it for today's discussion. That roughly halves the cost of what you're going to be saying. So let's say 1%. Now you say, well, actually, does carbon pricing incentivize all of the levers?
mm,
And it doesn't, right? We have to say that there are some very expensive levers, like biomaterials tend to be a very expensive one. Some of the high temperature decarbonization solutions, they're
mhm,
well above 70
yeah,
euros per ton. And so there's another half of all of the levers, to keep it simple, that you can pretty much say carbon pricing in its current form is not going to incentivize those. So, you've now got halving it again. And so we're at 0.5%. And then the final thing to say is, well, it's not going to happen overnight either. What's
mm,
the most optimistic scenario as far as how quickly we're going to get to net zero on the things that we're incentivizing? And even 10 years is a very optimistic time frame for this to be driven through carbon pricing. And
yeah,
so, what that gets you to is something like 0.05% of
mhm,
inflation on your procurement costs. So,
yeah,
and actually, I think we're seeing that it comes in even less than that. You know, but what it is driving is the learning across the procurement and the suppliers. It's really accelerating the amount of primary data that we're getting, so product carbon footprints from our suppliers. So that's
mm,
been greatly accelerated. And like I said at the outset, we've got something like 24% of
mm,
our scope 3.1, so the purchase goods and services data now comes from primary data, and that is continuing to accelerate
yeah,
partly because of this. And I think the other thing that's really been accelerated by this is renewable electricity, because
mm,
we've been plugging that pretty hard. We're a sponsor of Schneider's Energize program. These are the things that we can tangibly see are happening from it. So it doesn't cost you the earth.
Mm,
It's it's a great catalyst and foundation for the program, but it doesn't take you away from needing to partner with suppliers, help them, guide them, and so on. But I don't think it's that complicated.
no,
It's yes, it's another calculation you need to make when you're doing a tender, but we're already doing tens,
mm,
if not hundreds, of calculations in a tender. Uh,
100%.
so, uh, so yeah, I don't think it's that level of complexity.
No, and I think one thing that really concerns me with a lot of the organizations who arguably do have the resources. I mean, you've talked about your initiatives. I've seen Canva came out, maybe it was yesterday or today, that they've put new solar farms online. There are organizations that are actually using their position and resource to have this incredible impact. There's also a layer who sit there and say, well, how can I possibly influence this scope 3 realistically? It's a nightmare trying to find primary data in organizations that disclose, let alone those who don't. But I find it quite concerning where you'll often have leadership saying this is important, it's in the report, we're SBTI, but the idea of sitting there with your chief procurement officer and doing a business case that clearly shows what the benefits of introducing a price on carbon is internally, communicating that to suppliers under an educational program that certainly
Yeah.
wouldn't cost the earth, and then having an evaluation process which AI can assist with in 10 times as efficiently as what we've ever been able to do, that considers the data provided, and we look at that alongside this. I just don't think that's rocket science to
No,
do.
exactly.
Sure, what the rationale continues to be as we approach 2030 to say, oh, that's very advanced and that's very complex, and we'll come back to that in 2 years'
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Else doing on scope 3 then?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And we are seeing, it's a slow journey, but we are seeing those companies engaging because of it. No. And then let me also say one other constraint. The people that sort of say, "Oh no, it's never going to work here." The other most common constraint is either my suppliers aren't mature enough, they're not doing PCFs, or PCFs aren't comparable.
Yes.
And so I would say that we were also in a very poor state. We were early on in our PCF journey when we did this, but that was almost one of the primary reasons to do it
Totally.
because we
Provide
needed
the
to
data.
incentivize. And the way that we incentivize is we say that if you don't have a PCF, then we will use an industry average emission factor plus 50%. And so there's a penalty in the tender in the
See.
event that they don't have a PCF. So that's how you address the first part. In the event that there is one that's looking very low, that is going to give them an advantage in the tender, we make sure that is explained. If it's not explained in their tender response, we pick up the phone, we have a call with them. If they say, "Oh yeah, that's our number from Eco Event 3.1," then okay, that is not going to win them the tender, right? But if they say, "Oh yes, you can see my scope 2 is very low because we did 100% renewable electricity last year, or I've done X, Y, and Z," if they know what they're talking about, then yes, that means that we feel comfortable with the decision.
And it's also not uh, by any stretch of the imagination impossible to sit there and go, well, look, you can argue buck and boo all you want that there's no consistent methodology and therefore none of it makes sense. But it's also not hard to include a schedule, as we do for
Yep.
10,000 legal, health, safety,
Exactly.
financial considerations in every other tender, and say, we know that this may not be absolutely set at an accounting standards level, which, mind you, is changing obviously with compliance in many places. But this is how we go about calculating this. Here is the guidance on the methodology, not rocket science to provide. If you want to depart from that because you have a strong view that we're wrong, great opportunity to collaborate and understand why that is. Otherwise, comply with this. And if you can't, that's okay. Get into our upskilling program that we're running for you.
Spot
And
on.
in time, if you still can't do it, well, not an excuse anymore. Sorry, you obviously don't care about this at all, and we're going to consider that as part of our tender. Like, none of that is crazy. We can't say, We want to incentivize all of this change. We want to make decisions that impact people and planet as much as financial, but we're too scared to ask for a bit of time to answer what is the
Yeah.
impact
Yeah.
do as a
And it gets the ball rolling, right? And I've said it's whilst this, it is a potential on cost to the business if you're awarding to a lower carbon business because of the carbon pricing, that it doesn't take away from the fact that you're, you know, in a competitive situation, that if all the suppliers have done renewable electricity, there will be a market there that they won't be able to rip you off for that. And in fact, many of them may have saved money in doing it at the same time. So it brings the level down.
I think as well, what's often not communicated through the channels is this is actually an opportunity to strengthen supplier relationships. Because if you are the one going out and saying, we know this is a bit hard and a bit annoying, and especially if you don't have the resources, and especially if you've never done this before, we don't want to come and add red tape and forms and process to what you do. That's not our intention, but this is the way the world is going. This is what we've committed. We want to do
Yeah.
right by that as well. And we are more than happy to help your team upskill here and get into this place. That actually can strengthen relationships, because by contrast, you have some organizations that will leave this so late and have let this quite late and say, figure it out. And it becomes a big stick much quicker than it is an opportunity to actually educate together. So being the leader in that situation and offering that example and guidance, and no doubt your team have endless resources that you can offer suppliers, it's actually a really good relationship building strategy.
Yeah, yeah. I make a face, we don't have unlimited resources. People assume, oh, you've got massive budgets, you've got people coming out of your ears. No, we are a small team. We are doing this on a shoestring, quite
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
But yes, we are spending time with our category teams, with our key suppliers. We've segmented to just look at those top. We've done an 80-20 sort of thing of
Mm,
who are the top emitting suppliers, and that brings us to a number of about 360 suppliers. And we've further segmented for where we're going to start, but those are the ones that we're really trying to target in
mhm.
order to adhere to the 5 elements of our pledge, and where we're applying carbon pricing. So we're doing that on tenders over £1 million. So that,
Yep.
again, we're not adding in extra burden in
Mhm.
areas where it's not going to really create real return.
And sustainability, I guess, can be difficult to land in the right rooms across an organization. So it's one thing where we might be doing a contained initiative or we have that direct relationship, but decisions get made across an organization in many departments, many entities. There's not always somebody who might be sustainability first in their thinking in those rooms. And traditionally within procurement processes, software, forms, guidance, it's relatively clunky and it's not streamlined. So how have you found getting sustainability into the conversation or into the scope of work, into the business case, into the contract, all of those things early, instead of sort of finding out after the fact that someone's gone and built a warehouse and nobody considered an ounce of sustainability in it? In this fragmented world, how are you injecting that early, or is that still something that you're working on?
Well, I wouldn't say that we're done, but we've done quite a few things to try to embed that. So, carbon pricing has become mandatory for certain categories now. So that is in our buying goods and services policy. So if they don't do it, they could get audited and found it out of compliance with our process. We've
Hmm.
embedded it into, so many of the different areas. So into our KPIs, we've embedded it into our supplier relationship management program,
Mm,
that when they have their quarterly or annual business review meetings, that again it has to be part of that. We've embedded it into the category strategy process. So
yeah.
it's a mandatory slide as they refresh their category strategies every year, and then the leadership team review those, make sure that it's in line.
Hmm.
Um, it's into our objectives as a team. So, I have a target, each that is cascaded now into each of the category and regional teams, so that everybody has that goal. It affects their bonus if they're not driving these things. The same for sustainable sourcing and so on. We've now got also our stakeholders. We've got it
Mm,
into their objectives and their KPIs so that they're also incentivized by this. Um, Not the scope 3, but the scope 1 and 2 is in our executives' remuneration bonuses, and that's where things like our energy strategy, where we can reduce cost, build resilience,
yeah.
and drive the decarbonization of our sites. And
Mm,
we've done, pretty well on that. We're now at 55% of the
mm,
way to our net zero 2030 goal on our scope 1 and 2.
yeah.
And we're using the examples of what we've done in our manufacturing sites and the fact that we've been on 100% renewable energy electricity since 2022. We're using that to show the example to our suppliers of how it can be done.
Showcase it. Exactly. And I think as well, obviously of the times, but what role does AI have to play in procurement programs and platforms and systems? And it's quite obvious, obviously, that organizations are going to be building agents that can prompt people as though you were in the room and say, have you considered this? But that has to be part of the infrastructure of decision making, right? It has to be part of a policy or a process that's already defined that that agent knows to look at that. So I think a lot of people are saying, well, AI and sustainability is going to change the world. But it's like if your decision making pipelines and your guidance and all the infrastructure that determines what is a good decision and what must be considered don't actually already have this perspective, this opinion, or this knowledge inside them, it's not actually going to change anything. It's just going to let that go through the keeper as it does now, right?
I think I don't think it's any different in sustainability as to how it's going to be in most parts of the business, right? So we're still at a relatively early stage in thinking about all the power of it. Obviously it's optimizing our written elements, as with probably most people. Um, for a bit of fun, the Scope 3 peer group has made an Ask Chris bot. So we fed it with
Fabulous.
lots of my things, and so you can go into the Scope 3 peer group's website right now, and you can go to the bot at the bottom and say
I'll
Ask
love
Chris,
this.
and you can get a bunch of decarbonization advice from there. We've worked with a company that's sort of looking at big data. So there's a little bit of AI in their solution, but it's more sort of modeling and optimization,
Mm,
where we've looked at all of the materials we're sourcing, what tonnage is, and of everything, the emission factors, not only of the primary material that we're buying, but also all of the sub materials that are made that you need in order to make that. So, for example, paracetamol, there are
yes.
something like 26 ingredients that you need to make the paracetamol for your Panadol tablet. And, we now know the electricity and the heat and the feedstock emissions of each of those 26 submaterials. And so then knowing where those suppliers are, we can say, right, this guy is in India, and therefore there's a great opportunity to do electricity there or to do heat there. And, so we're now starting to be much more laser focused. But broadly speaking, this model has optimized all of these things. And so with all of that knowledge, of course, including market prices like the electricity price in each country, the gas price, the coal price, the biogas prices, what's likely to happen over the next 5 years as all of these things evolve, that has then crunched all of that data together to say, this is your optimized path to get to your 42% scope 3 carbon reduction goal in 2030.
Exactly. I mean, I remember it feels decades ago, even though it wasn't, but I remember sitting there in mining and you wanted to do, say, one decarbonization project. We were looking at changing an energy source from natural gas. And I certainly wasn't an Excel wizard and certainly far from a big data guru. I would have to go and find a business analyst, sit there, try and translate what was in my head or my knowledge over to them, get them to crunch some numbers, go and do some research, come back with a sheet. Then I would type it up. Then someone needs to turn it into a PowerPoint slide. And before you know
Yeah,
it, you're a month in before you get to the first board paper. Whereas
exactly.
now, people who want to run with some of these amazing incentives and ideas can actually do that so much more efficiently. So, getting that sort of decision making pipeline in place to do that is obviously amazing. You've been extremely generous, Chris, with time and knowledge today. So, thank you so much. I know we're at time. Is there any last little bit of wisdom you would like to leave anyone tackling this space at the moment?
Didn't get to talk about VPPAs and market instruments, so
Please
the
do.
one thing that's the other story that I like to get out there is that there is an opportunity for companies to really start to take renewable electricity into their own hands. What we are doing is we are in America, we're doing tax credit transfer to buy renewable electricity for our entire supply chain, not just for our own sites. So if our tier
Wow.
where our tier two, tier three, tier four suppliers down our supply chain, we don't even know who they are, for example. We're going to buy renewable electricity on their behalf to make sure that we can claim their part of the emissions related to electricity is zero. In Europe, we're doing a big VPPA to do exactly the same, and we expect to make money out of that as well. And then we're going to use the money that that generates to buy RECs in the rest of the world. Now, um, so this strategy should allow us to get to zero electricity emissions across our entire supply chain
Hmm.
whilst making money at the same time. So
Interesting.
that is another really interesting takeaway. Now, you might say, well, let me just address, because the one concern is, well, that's not allowed by the SBTI, is it? Well,
Mm,
yes, you're right. The corporate net zero standard V1, it doesn't allow, but we're expecting what came through the consultation at the end of last year, and V2, which is expected imminently, is
mm.
expected to allow this. And the GHG protocol is silent on that, but they're working on the Actions and Markets Initiative, which will allow this type of thing from what we're hearing, and will require separate market-based and location-based reporting on Scope 3. So there's a lot of detail just mentioning there very quickly, but this looks good and is a fantastic way for us all to accelerate renewable electricity in our countries and around the world.
That's really fascinating. And I think this is probably one of the only other ones I've seen that's gone to that depth. And I mentioned what Cam had shared yesterday as well around that sort of don't just worry about yourself. You need to start thinking about the renewable energy opportunity for your supply chain. And so I know they've gone and got renewable energy matched to the consumption for every US and Canadian print partner and done the whole climate framework for that because obviously that helps that company get started. And you're saying you have also gone through that process and done that. You talk
Yeah.
about how gets recognized in the sort of accounting and reporting side of that, which is, obviously something that always comes up. But I guess if we come back to the purposive approach here, we're really trying to bring more renewable energy projects online and contribute to the market mechanisms that facilitate that. If that is someone's objective, would you say that this is the most effective way to do that, or are there other ways that you explored and decided not to go that path?
I think it is probably one of the most effective ways. Certainly very quick.
Mm,
And if you're doing this with 100 or 1,000 suppliers, who've each got smaller scale, that tends to be a more expensive mechanism as well for each of them to be doing that, especially if they have to use RECs.
mm,
Yes, I think this is, it's a bold move, but it's
mhm,
taking control, taking it into your own hands and driving the change. So there are lots
100%.
of companies, and there's information online if people would like to understand more about that. Mars have been very, very public on their approach. They call it RAC, RACC. So you can look at their information. I think Netflix are doing the same. Microsoft are doing the same. And lots of companies are now jumping on this bandwagon in order to drive their decarbonization.
Yeah, 100%. And, even if this is your 1% of the way contribution, if that's how someone needs to think about this, good. We need those steps forward. And every time you go
Precisely.
out and or ask a supplier or contribute to these initiatives or go and put this requirement in front of somebody, the way I see it is that is actually the most impactful thing you can do. If the majority of your emissions are sitting in scope 3, what are you doing to add to the business case of somebody else taking the right step? That is the missing piece in this space continuously. And I think the
Yeah.
work you've done is just been so commercial and strategic in that regard. And we need to see that en masse globally. And as we're recording this, we couldn't be sitting in a more obvious time to talk about why that needs to happen, not just from a sustainability perspective. So
Absolutely.
fascinating. And we're just so grateful that you've given so much of your insight and experience to us, Chris. We really do appreciate it. I will be ask Chris Bott for everyone else watching this as well.
Great. That sounds good. But been a pleasure. So thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
No worries. Thanks so much, Chris.